Where do the old gods come from? And what we're going to talk about today is not just like where they come from within the Warcraft universe, but where are they based out of within our universe, within our lore as people. And given that it's October and Halloween is soon to be upon us, I thought that Sage and I could discuss something truly terrifying, which is the madness of the old gods and the madness of H.P. Lovecraft.
Good old Howard Philip Lovecraft. He wrote a lot of short stories, novellas about horror and mystery, and he's kind of created what we know of today as Lovecraftian horrors. These are incomprehensible beings of madness and insanity that exist beyond our world.
And a lot of the old gods, in where their names are similar, and also the theme of madness, which was something that Mr. Lovecraft wrote about all the time, come into play. And so we're going to go through each one of the old gods one by one, kind of look at their name, look at the name of the Lovecraftian outer gods, as they're called in Lovecraft lore, and the name that they're taken from. But then, does the name really match the Lovecraft versus the Warcraft? So, I'm Rage.
I'm Sage.
And today, we bring you Warcraft versus Lovecraft. So let's start out the conversation with Cthulhu. And Cthulhu is our first old god that we really kind of interacted with inside of Warcraft lore.
Is the final boss of AQ40 all the way back in vanilla.
Yep, the Temple of Ahn'Qiraj. And where we meet the Qiraji, an insect-like race that Cthulhu is controlling and manipulating to build power. And Cthulhu himself is, it's interesting. In one of the scenes with the Emperor Princes of the Qiraji, you see the eye there, and it's called the Master's Eye. And when you kneel down in the old raid to do that, you see it say that you are in the presence of a god. And these two twin emperors worship him like that, and so do the rest of the Qiraji. But little do they know, they're just being driven mad and controlled by Cthulhu. And so Cthulhu gets his name most likely from Cthulhu. If we look at how they're spelled, Cthulhu to Cthulhu, very similar, and yet Cthulhu and Cthulhu, as far as appearances go and what they're about, couldn't be further from each other.
Yeah, while they share a name, they really don't share a lot in theme. Because Cthulhu, as I'm sure a lot of people have heard, is like the Lovecraftian horror. If you talk about Lovecraft, you usually hear it referred to as the Cthulhu mythos. But Cthulhu really doesn't live up to that. Cthulhu is a giant eye with, tentacles and things, but you go to Cthulhu, and he's this large, humanoid thing with, a cephalopod face and wings and everything, and, appearance-wise, they couldn't be different. And I just feel like, they just kind of took the name.
Yeah, they borrowed from something that displays madness.
Yeah.
And then gave it to Cthulhu, and then took the name, kind of rearranged the letters, and came up with this new name and this new old god in Warcraft lore. But Cthulhu himself, he is not an aquatic creature at all.
No.
And Cthulhu is. Cthulhu sleeps in R'yla, the drowned ancient city, and he waits there dreaming, so to say. But Cthulhu himself is not waiting or dreaming or in any type of aquatic nature. In fact, he's in quite the opposite. He's in the desert of Silithus, surrounded by these dry, arid areas full of the Qiraji bugs that live there.
Yeah.
And so these two couldn't be further from the truth. But Cthulhu, he is freaky. If anybody remembers actually doing the fight, it is madness. There's certain points in the fight where Cthulhu will swallow the player down into his stomach. And when you get back out, you realize the stomach is huge, and yet Cthulhu that you're fighting is nowhere near that size. And so I want to point out that kind of connection to Lovecraftian lore, to Warcraft, is that in Lovecraft, a lot of the outer gods are in these alternate dimensions, or they can slip in and out. And we're going to get to that later on when we talk about Yogg-Saron and Yogg-Sothoth a little bit more.
Yeah.
But this alternate dimension stuff, and it almost feels like these beings are from an alternate dimension, or in Warcraft, from the Void itself, as they are servants of the Void Lords.
Yeah, they are from beyond the world around us.
Exactly. And that's what makes them scary, though, is that the old gods in Warcraft are servants to something even greater. And in Lovecraft, we find that, these are the outer gods. They're not servants to anything greater inside of Lovecraft lore.
Yeah.
And yet, inside of Warcraft lore, there's something even darker and more maddening and more crazy than the old gods themselves. And so moving on to crazy, let's go to the master of driving things insane himself, Yogg-Saron, the old god with the blood of Saronite. And Yogg-Saron most likely gets his name from Yogg-Sothoth. And Yogg-Sothoth in Lovecraftian lore, again, like, they could be kind of similar in that Yogg-Saron has a lot of faces, and instead of a lot of eyes, he has a lot of mouths, actually, where eyes would be if you look at him while you're during the fight.
Yeah.
And Yogg-Sothoth in Lovecraftian lore is this interdimensional being that is omniscient and is usually depicted with a lot of eyes and a lot of tendrils. So instead of eyes, we have mouths on Yogg-Saron. We do have a lot of tendrils and tentacles on Yogg-Saron. But I do think there is a little bit more connection than just the name with this one, in that Yogg-Sothoth, inside of Lovecraftian lore, is almost deemed as an omniscient being. And if you remember the fight with Yogg-Saron, you go into several brain areas, as I'm going to call them, in which you witness things that have happened in Azeroth's history that I don't think Yogg-Saron physically was there to be a part of. Like the making of the Dragon Soul, Arthas torturing, Bolvar, and other main characters and other big events that happen. And so it's almost like Yogg-Saron is omniscient in that he knows things that he physically wasn't there present for.
Yeah. Now, the biggest point of contention I see with Yogg-Sothoth and Yogg-Saron is that Yogg-Saron very much is a villain. We are opposed to him, while Yogg-Sothoth isn't so much a malicious character. He exists outside of our universe, but people have gone to him for knowledge. But the price of knowledge tends to be pretty hefty, as one would assume. Omniscience has a way of driving one mad.
And again, that's a theme in Lovecraft stuff, is the terror of madness. And if we look at Shadow Priests and Xalatath and the Void Lords and how the Void affects even in Legion itself, in the expansion that we're in now, we see that the Void drives people mad, and so the price of knowledge is madness. And we see the characters in Legion, like Illyria and some of the others, point out that, or Locust Walker, that's the other guy, they point out that you only see the Void's end of all that knowledge. You only see their perspective. And so it is maddening, and you have to hold on to the idea that yes, this is knowledge, and it's omniscient knowledge, but it's only from a perspective. So is that true omniscience or not when it comes to the Void? Whereas Yogg-Sothoth is true omniscience.
Yeah.
Moving on past him, we're going to get to the GOAT. And what I mean by the GOAT is Yogg-Sorron. Yogg-Sorron is a seven-headed old god that was killed by Aman'Thul. He ripped him out of the planet. And then his last dying breath upon the land of Pandaria was to curse it. And so then we get the Shah. And we have the Shah of Fear, the Shah of Anger, the Shah of Hatred, and all these other Shahs. And each Shah is a head on Yogg-Sorron, or one part of Yogg-Sorron. And so it's a seven-headed thing. And the puzzle box of Yogg-Saron says, when it's talking, it says, have you seen him? The black goat staring out from the woods. And so Yogg-Sorron is based off of this old god in Lovecraft, by name at least, and some of these other references as a goat, to Shub-Niggurath. And Shub-Niggurath in Lovecraftian lore is mentioned as the black goat of the woods with 1,000 young.
Yeah, and I think that ties in very nicely with Yogg-Saron, because while he doesn't have 1,000 young, the Shahs could almost be considered his young, his offspring.
Well, you could even take it that there is 1,000, because you have the Shahs themselves of hatred, anger, and all these named ones, but the Shah, we see little creepy crawly Shahs all the time throughout all of Pandaria, as little mobs to elite mobs to dungeon bosses, the people that are affected by the Shah, and so could it be in the thousands? Yeah, I think that's a direct way to take it from it.
That is a way of looking at it, most certainly.
Now, Shub-Niggurath, these are hard to pronounce, in Lovecraftian lore is mentioned as a she. I'm going to read a script from the wiki, from Lovecraftian wiki here. She is a perverse fertility deity, said to appear as an enormous cloudy mass which extrudes black tentacles, slime-dripping mouths, and short, writhing goat legs. Small creatures are continually spat forth by the monstrosity, which are either reconsumed into the miasmatic form or escape to some monstrous life elsewhere. And boy, does that sound fitting for the Shahs.
Yeah.
And how they just kind of roll out of people's emotions and other things like that inside of Pandaria.
Well, and aren't they, if I remember right, beings of black tentacles, slime-dripping mouths, and all that?
Absolutely. And so we see Blizzard lore people grabbing these ideas from Mr. Lovecraft and slapping them together. And so in name and in the GOAT, this one actually matches. Do you have any points of contention on this one?
No, I think that this one's actually a pretty close 1-to-1.
Minus a he to she, but who knows? Maybe Yasharaz is a she. I mean,
I think the old gods are pretty genderless for the most part.
They're ambiguous in their gender. So the next one that we have here is our current, maybe not current, but the old god that's staring us down, so to say, in what's going to come after Legion. And we're all thinking Enzoth is finally going to make his appearance. The old god who is in the water, who is in the deeps of the ocean, who is in the sleeping city of Nyalotha. And remember how we talked about Cthulhu versus Cthulhu not fitting? We're going to expand on that here when we talk about Enzoth. Enzoth is most likely named after Nyarlathotep, or Nyarlathotep, and he is described in Lovecraftian lore as the haunter of the red abyss, the thing that should not be, described as an inky shadow. And so that's all we have. There's not a whole lot on by name only. So Enzoth, Nyarlathotep, but Enzoth more fits Cthulhu than any other old god.
Yeah, Enzoth, as we know, was imprisoned in the seas of Azeroth. Just like Cthulhu sleeps deep in the Pacific Ocean. Mm-hmm. They both have great ties to, wondrous cities. You have Nyalotha with N'Zoth, and you have R'lyeh with Cthulhu. And I also wanted to bring up a point with this. It is very commonly referred to that, I'm going to read a quote from the wiki, when the stars were right, they could plunge from world to world through the sky. But when the stars were wrong, they could not live. Now, as one of Il'gynoth's whispers was, to find him, drown yourself in a circle of stars. Well, if you look up in Deepholm, where the Maelstrom is, there is a circle of stars with tentacles. That ties back to N'Zoth. And even beyond that, when the stars are right, at the end of Legion, we are imprisoning the Titans. These are celestial bodies made manifest. Mm-hmm. Well, they are the #1 enemy to the old gods, and them being imprisoned sounds pretty right for the old gods to make their return.
So as far as lore goes, Enzoth would be more tightly connected to Cthulhu.
Yeah, all the lore seems to point right towards Cthulhu with Enzoth.
And they just went with a different name, maybe, in their thought process at Blizzard, when they were thinking about the Haunter of the Deep Abyss. Now, if we look at images of Nyarlathotep, it is very similar to Enzoth as well. Just a tentacly black mass, but Cthulhu's backstory and all these things pointing about stars and these lines directly taken from Il'gynoth, tying back to Enzoth, really point towards Enzoth and Cthulhu being more ethos attached.
Yeah. And really, at the core of it with the old gods, they took a lot of things from various different parts of Lovecraft and rearranged them and restitched them in different ways. So none of this is a straight 1-to-1 pairing.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And the biggest thing to remember is that in all of Lovecraftian stuff, and we talked about it earlier, was madness. Madness. And so the old gods drive things mad. And when you fight Yogg-Saron, you have a sanity meter. And when it runs out, Yogg-Saron controls you.
Yeah.
Permanently. Like, in that fight, I remember being in Uldar. If you lost your sanity, you were gone. The raid only had one choice, which was kill your ass, because you were now a servant of the old gods. And what is truly more terrifying than utter madness?
Well, and if you look at any of the great old ones, the Outer Gods, they all have their own cults of followers that worship them as gods.
Yep. And then, back to one more thing on Enzoth. The Yogg-Saron puzzle box says that he sleeps in the city of Nyalotha. And Cthulhu himself is known as the Sleeper of Ryla. So I don't know how to pronounce that word. These guys are tied together. You can see all the strings attached from one thing to the next. And who knows? Maybe if we all dive into some Lovecraftian lore, we might be able to see some predictions or maybe some outcomes that'll be coming up to us in the next expansion of World of Warcraft. Maybe after BlizzCon, we can compare some Lovecraftian lore to what's going to be coming up in the next expansion.
At the end of the day, if you want to find the future, best look in the past.
There you go. Or in the madness of the void. I'm Rage.
I'm Sage.
If you like this content, hit like and subscribe, share with a friend, post it somewhere. If you think we're crazy, go ahead and write it down in the comments. If you think we're on key, totally awesome. Love to converse with you guys in the comments. Thank you so much for the support that this channel has had so far. We really appreciate it, and we will see you later.
Peace.